My name is Natalie Reynolds, and at 29 I inherited 3 upscale apartments from my grandmother, Eleanor, while newly married to James Bennett. I decided to keep this windfall secret despite questioning if that was the right thing to do. Thank God I listened to my instincts because just 7 days after our honeymoon, my mother-in-law, Diana, showed up at our door with a notary and documents in hand. That gut feeling saved my financial future in ways I never imagined before I tell you. How my mother-in-law nearly took everything. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever had to protect what's rightfully yours. My relationship with my grandmother, Eleanor, was something special, born in 1935. She came of age during a time when women weren't expected to be financially independent. But Eleanor defied those expectations after my grandfather died. Unexpectedly, in 1963, she was left alone with a small insurance payout and a mountain of questions about her future. "Never put your financial security in someone else's hands," she told me countless times throughout my childhood. "Not even someone you love." Instead of remarrying, as everyone expected, Grandma Eleanor took a job as a secretary at a real estate firm there. She observed how the market worked carefully, studying patterns and opportunities that others missed. When the market dipped in the early 1970s, she used her savings to purchase her first property, a small apartment in what was then an overlooked neighborhood. Over the decades, she continued this strategy, buying low when others were afraid and holding on to properties as their values grew. By the time I was in college, Grandma had built a modest portfolio, but I had no idea of its true extent. We were close. I'd visit her every Sunday for coffee and homemade scones, but she kept her financial matters private. Even from family, when she was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago, everything changed. The 6 months of her illness brought us even closer. Moved into her spare bedroom to help with her care, and during those quiet evenings she began sharing more of her life wisdom. "Natalie," she said one evening, as we sat watching the sunset from her balcony, "I've built something I'm proud of, and soon it will be yours. But promise me you'll be smart about it." I assumed she was talking about sentimental items, or perhaps a modest savings account when she passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was devastated. The grief consumed me entirely for weeks. It wasn't until the reading of her will that I understood what she'd been telling me. To my granddaughter, Natalie Reynolds, I leave my entire real estate portfolio consisting of 3 properties. The attorney read, sliding a folder across the table to me. I opened it with shaking hands to find the deeds to 3 fully paid apartments, a luxury 2-bedroom in downtown worth nearly $950,000, a waterfront condo in an exclusive area valued at $2 million, and a smaller 1-bedroom in an up-and-coming neighborhood worth about $500,000. The first 2 were currently rented to long-term tenants with excellent payment histories, while the third had been Grandma's home. "This can't be right," I whispered, looking up at her attorney, Frank Wilson, who had managed her affairs for decades. "Your grandmother was an exceptionally shrewd investor," Frank explained with a gentle smile. "She wanted you to have financial independence no matter what life threw at you." The days following were a blur of paperwork meetings with property managers and trying to wrap my head around suddenly being a landlord. The rental income from the 2 leased properties totaled just over $7,000 monthly, more than enough to cover the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs. With plenty left over, the 3rd apartment I decided would be my personal sanctuary. A place to feel close to Grandma while I figured out my next steps. I didn't tell anyone about my inheritance. Immediately, past relationships had taught me some hard lessons about how money can change dynamics. An ex-boyfriend had once borrowed thousands from my savings without asking, claiming later that since we were a couple, my money was our money. Another had subtly pushed me to cover more expenses once he learned my salary was higher than his. These experiences made me cautious when I met James. 6 months after Grandma's passing, I was still processing both my grief and my new financial reality. He knew I had inherited my grandmother's apartment where I now lived, but I never mentioned the full extent of what she'd left me. It wasn't a deliberate deception, just a detail. I wasn't ready to share until I felt secure in our relationship. James was charming, ambitious, and kind. As a marketing executive for his family's business, he came from a background of comfort, if not outright wealth. We connected immediately over our shared love of historical documentaries and spicy food. Unlike previous relationships that developed slowly, things with James moved quickly, intensely. 3 months into dating, I was already wondering if he might be the one. 6 months in, we were discussing marriage. Through it all, I maintained my financial independence, paying my share of our expenses while managing my properties, quietly on the side. The rental income went into a separate account, untouched except for property-related expenses and investments. Sometimes, as our relationship deepened, I would lie awake wondering if I should tell him everything was keeping this secret, a breach of trust, or was it simply prudent protection, until I knew for sure we were built to last. Grandma's voice seemed to whisper in my ear during these moments of doubt. Financial independence is not something you compromise, Natalie. Not for anyone, James proposed on New Year's Eve. Just 9 months after we'd met, the ring was beautiful. A family heirloom diamond, reset in a modern platinum band standing there with snowflakes falling around us in the park where we'd had our first date. I said yes, without hesitation. I can't wait to build our future together, he said, sliding the ring onto my finger. We're going to have an amazing life that night as we celebrated with champagne in my apartment. Grandma's apartment. I almost told him about the inheritance. The words were on the tip of my tongue. But something held me back, a whisper of caution that I couldn't quite explain. James came from what he called comfortable money. His father, Richard, had built a successful marketing firm that now employed 30 people, including James as the creative director. His mother, Diana, came from old family money and had never worked a day in her life, instead dedicating herself to charity boards and social clubs. I met them formally as James's fiancée at an elegant dinner at their suburban mansion. The house was impressive. 5 bedrooms, a swimming pool, and a 3-car garage. Housing luxury vehicles, Diana greeted me with air kisses and a critical eye that seemed to evaluate everything from my shoes to my posture. "So, Natalie," she said over appetizers, "James tells us you work in publishing. That must be interesting." The way she said interesting made it clear she found it anything but. "I love my job," I replied truthfully. As an editor for a mid-sized publishing house, I earned a respectable salary that had allowed me to live comfortably even before Grandma's inheritance. "And your family? James mentioned your parents live out of state." "Yes, my parents are in Arizona. They retired there last year," Diana nodded, taking a sip of her wine. "And you live in your grandmother's old apartment. Is that right? How quaint to keep it in the family." There was something in her tone, a subtle probing, that made me glad I hadn't disclosed more. Throughout the evening, Diana asked seemingly innocent questions about my finances, my career aspirations, and my family background. Each time I gave honest but vague answers, increasingly uncomfortable with her interest in my financial situation. The wedding planning became a battleground of wills. Diana had strong opinions about everything, from the venue to the floral arrangements. When I suggested a modest ceremony at a historic library, she scoffed. The Bennett have always married at St. Mark's Cathedral, followed by a reception at the Windsor Hotel. She informed me it's tradition. Both venues were far beyond the budget James and I had discussed. But when I mentioned this, Diana waved away my concerns. "We'll contribute." Of course, a Bennett wedding is a reflection of the family. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of either revealing my financial capabilities or accepting their help and the strings that would inevitably come attached. In the end, I agreed to the cathedral, but insisted on a different reception venue that was more in line with our budget, claiming it had special significance to us as a couple. Our wedding day was beautiful, but tense. Diana's disapproving glances at my choices, from my less traditional dress to the band we'd selected, were barely concealed. Still, when James took my hands and recited his vows, nothing else mattered. I was marrying the man I loved. We decided to maintain separate finances after marriage. While opening a joint account for household expenses, James didn't question this arrangement, explaining that his parents had done the same throughout their marriage. "Mom has her family money. Dad has the business," he explained. They've always kept things separate, and it works for them. This relieved me, though. I wondered if Diana's separate finances were truly independent, or if Richard controlled everything. Despite the appearance of division, the first few weeks of marriage were a blissful blur. We honeymooned in Greece, returning to set up our home together in my apartment, our apartment. Now, James had sold his downtown loft using the proceeds to update our kitchen and bathroom. It was during these renovations that I noticed the first red flag as we discussed options with the contractor. James casually mentioned future renovations we might consider. Eventually, we'll want to knock down this wall, create an open concept space, he said. And when kids come along, we'll need to find somewhere bigger anyway. This apartment has a lot of sentimental value to me, I reminded him. I'm not sure I want to make such dramatic changes. He squeezed my hand. Of course, honey, I understand, but you know what they say about family. Money each generation should build on what came before. My parents started with Dad's small office and built it into what it is today. We should aim to do even better for our kids. His casual assumption about family, money, and our future made me increasingly glad I'd kept my inheritance private. It wasn't that James seemed greedy, quite the opposite. He was generous and hardworking, but there was an expectation in his voice, a certainty about how families should operate financially that echoed his mother's values more than it aligned with mine. As those early weeks turned into months, I continued managing my properties quietly. The tenant in the downtown apartment requested some repairs, which I handled through my property manager. The waterfront condo continued generating excellent rental income, and our home, the smallest of the 3 properties, but the most meaningful, became truly ours as we settled into married life. Yet my decision to keep my financial situation private created a constant low-level anxiety. Was I being dishonest? Was I setting our marriage up for failure by withholding such significant information? These questions haunted me, especially as Diana became an increasingly present figure in our lives. Diana Bennett established a routine of weekly visits almost immediately after our honeymoon ended. Every Sunday afternoon, she would arrive precisely at 2 Caesarian, usually bearing some small housewarming gift that inevitably came with commentary. "These dish towels are from Italy," she said one Sunday, presenting a wrapped package. "I noticed the ones in your kitchen are rather basic." Another week. "This throw pillow will add some much-needed color to your living room, dear." The current palette is so drab, each visit followed the same pattern, subtle criticisms wrapped in the guise of helpfulness, followed by pointed questions about our finances, my job, and our future plans. I learned from James that this behavior wasn't new. Diana had grown up wealthy, but had married Richard when he was still building his business. Her family money had provided the initial investment for his company, a fact she had apparently never let him forget in 35 years of marriage. "Mom has always been protective of the family assets," James explained. After one particularly tense visit she made, Dad signed a prenup that basically kept her family money separate from anything they built together. "Is that why she keeps asking about our finances?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. James laughed. "Probably she did the same thing with my sister Tracy when she got married. Mom's just old-fashioned about family money staying in the family." This revelation made me even more determined to keep my inheritance private. Diana clearly viewed marriage as a potential financial threat rather than a partnership, and I wasn't eager to have her attention turn to my assets as the weeks passed. Diana's helpful suggestions extended beyond home decor to my career and personal finances. "Publishing is such an unstable industry these days," she remarked during one visit. "Have you considered something more secure? Perhaps James could find you a position at the family company." "I'm happy where I am," I replied firmly. "My job is very stable, and I'm up for a promotion next quarter." Diana smiled in that way that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear, but it's always good to have options, especially when you start thinking about children. The Bennett grandchildren have always had the very best of everything." Her comments about children became increasingly frequent, as did her not-so-subtle inquiries about my family background. "Your grandmother's apartment is in a decent area," she said one afternoon while James was out picking up lunch. "Did she leave you anything else? Family jewelry, perhaps, investments? Just some personal items and memories," I replied deliberately. "Vague. Grandma was pretty practical. Diana nodded clearly, not believing me. Family legacies are so important to preserve. The Bennetts have always been careful about keeping assets within the family line. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Diana and Richard's home. James's sister Tracy and her husband Michael were also present, along with Richard's brother Harold and his wife Susan. The conversation had turned to real estate investments, with Richard discussing a commercial property he was considering for the business property. "Values in that area are increasing steadily," I commented. Drawing on knowledge I'd gained managing my own investments, Diana's eyes narrowed slightly. "You seem quite knowledgeable about real estate for someone so young." I shrugged. "I've learned a bit from managing Grandma's apartment and dealing with the condo." Condo board," Diana repeated, setting down her wine glass. "I thought you lived in an apartment building." My stomach dropped as I realized my slip. "Yes, it's technically a condominium, just habit to call it an apartment." "Interesting," Diana murmured. "James never mentioned it was a condominium. Those can be quite valuable depending on the location." I quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done over the next week. I noticed Diana's questions becoming more specific, more targeted. She began mentioning mutual acquaintances who lived in my building, commenting on recent sales in the area, even asking about my grandmother's financial advisors in case we ever need recommendations. Then came the day I overheard her on the phone while she thought I was in the shower. I had forgotten my watch on the kitchen counter and quietly walked back to retrieve it when I heard Diana's voice, uncharacteristically intense. "Yes, I need everything you can find on Eleanor Reynolds' estate," she was saying. "Property. Records, well. Filings, everything my sources suggest. There might be more than just the one apartment. Yes, it's important. Family security is at stake." I froze, my heart pounding. Diana was actively investigating my inheritance when I confronted James about it later. He dismissed my concerns. "Mom's just being mom," he said with a laugh. "She probably wants to make sure your grandmother's affairs were handled properly. She did the same thing with Tracy's husband's family business, and why would that be any of her business?" I asked, trying to keep the anger from my voice. James looked surprised at my tone. "She's just protective of the family. It doesn't mean anything, but it did mean something, and I knew it." The next day, I called Frank Wilson, my grandmother's attorney, who now handled my affairs, and scheduled an urgent appointment. "I need to make sure my inheritance is legally protected," I explained. "Once in his office specifically, I want to ensure that these properties remain solely in my name, regardless of my marital status." Frank nodded. "Understanding your grandmother anticipated something like this. That's why she set up the properties the way she did in a trust with you as the sole beneficiary. But we can add additional safeguards if you're concerned." Over the next week, we updated all the legal protections around my inheritance. The properties were placed in an ironclad trust that would remain separate from marital assets. I updated my will, established clear documentation of the premarital nature of the inheritance, and created a comprehensive paper trail that would stand up to any challenge. Throughout this process, the tension at home continued to build. Diana's visits increased in frequency, and James became increasingly defensive of his mother's behavior each time I tried to establish boundaries. He would accuse me of overreacting or being paranoid. "She's just trying to get to know you better," he insisted. After Diana had spent an hour questioning me about my parents' financial situation, I began to wonder if I had made a terrible mistake in marrying into this family, but I still loved James, and I hoped that with time and clear boundaries, we could build a healthy relationship with his parents. Little did I know that Diana was already several steps ahead of me, planning a move that would force everything into the open. James left for a week-long business trip to Chicago on a Monday morning. We kissed goodbye at the door, and he promised to call every night. "Try to use this time to bond with Mom," he suggested as he loaded his suitcase into the taxi. "Maybe have her over for lunch or something." Damn. I nodded noncommittally, secretly, Relieved to have a break from the family dynamics, my plan was to catch up on work, maybe do some maintenance on the waterfront property, and enjoy some peaceful evenings alone. That peace lasted exactly 2 days on Wednesday afternoon. The doorbell rang. When I opened it, Diana stood there with a man I didn't recognize, a leather briefcase in his hand, and a professionally neutral expression on his face. "Natalie, darling," Diana exclaimed with false warmth. "I hope we're not interrupting anything important. This is Mr. Peterson, our family notary. May we come in?" Before I could respond, she had already stepped past me into the apartment, Mr. Peterson following awkwardly behind her. "I was actually in the middle of a work call," I lied, trying to regain control of the situation. "Perhaps you could come back later. This won't take long," Diana assured me, setting her designer purse on my coffee table and gesturing for Mr. Peterson to do the same with his briefcase. "It's actually quite important for the family." I remained standing while they made themselves comfortable on my sofa. Diana was wearing one of her typical lunch, with the ladies' outfits, an expensive cream suit with gold jewelry and perfectly coiffed hair. She looked like she was prepared for a business meeting rather than a casual visit. "What exactly is this about?" I asked, crossing my arms. Diana's expression shifted to one of concerned sympathy. "It's about family security, dear. As Bennett, we have certain responsibilities to protect what generations have built." She nodded to Mr. Peterson, who opened his briefcase and removed several official-looking documents. "These are simple family trust documents." Diana continued smoothly. "All Bennett assets are protected through our family trust. It saves tremendously on taxes and ensures everything remains within the family line." I felt a chill run down my spine, and this concerns me. "How exactly?" "Well, as James's wife, you're now part of the family," she explained with a tight smile. "And we've recently become aware that you have some assets that should be properly protected." The realization hit me like a truck. "You investigated me." Diana waved a manicured hand dismissively. "I made some inquiries. Yes, it's standard for the family, and it seems your grandmother was quite generous, wasn't she? 3 properties? Not just the one." Quite impressive for a secretary to accumulate the contempt in her voice when she said, "Secretary," made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. "My grandmother's affairs are private, as is my inheritance." "Nothing is truly private when family security is concerned," Diana countered. "These documents simply transfer your properties into the Bennett family trust for protection you'll still have access to. Everything, of course, but with the added benefit of our family's financial advisors and tax advantages." Mr. Peterson slid the papers toward me with an apologetic smile. "If you could sign here and initial each page," he said quietly. I picked up the document and scanned the first page. My heart pounding. The legal language was complex, but the intention was clear. This would effectively transfer control of my properties to the Bennett family. Trust with Diana and Richard as primary trustees did. "James know you were planning this?" I asked, looking directly at Diana. A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed her face. "James understands family obligations. He knows these matters are best handled by those with experience." In other words, no, James had no idea his mother was here trying to gain control of my inheritance. "These properties are already in a trust," I informed her, setting the papers down. "My grandmother established it before her death." Diana's smile tightened further. "A limited family trust can't provide the protection and advantages that ours can. Our financial team manages millions in assets. They can maximize your returns in ways your grandmother's small-time attorney never could." Just then, my phone rang James's ringtone. I picked it up, relieved for the interruption. "Hey, everything okay?" His voice came through. Mom texted she was stopping by to drop off that wedding album. I looked at Diana, who maintained her pleasant expression despite being caught in a lie. "Your mother is here," I confirmed, putting the phone on speaker along with a notary named Mr. Peterson. "They've brought some documents for me to sign, transferring my inheritance into your family trust." A pause. "What inheritance?" Diana jumped in smoothly. "James, darling, I was just explaining to Natalie the benefits of our family financial protection. It seems her grandmother left her quite a portfolio, 3 valuable properties that would benefit from proper management. 3 properties, James sounded genuinely confused. Natalie, what is she talking about? I took a deep breath. My grandmother left me 3 properties when she died. This apartment plus 2 others that generate rental income. I maintain them in a separate trust as they were premarital assets. And you never told me the hurt in his voice was evident. We can discuss that later, I said firmly. Right now, I'd like to know if you were aware your mother was bringing a notary to have me sign over my inheritance while you're out of town. Another pause. Mom, what are you doing? Diana's composure slipped slightly. I'm protecting the family, James, as I've always done. These assets should be properly managed under the Bennett name. I'll call you back, James said abruptly. Mom, don't do anything until I get home tomorrow after he hung up. Diana's friendly facade completely disappeared. You've put me in a very awkward position, she said coldly. Gathering her purse, James doesn't always understand what's necessary for long-term financial security. Your secrecy about these assets raises serious concerns about your commitment to this marriage. I stood my ground. My financial independence is not a threat to my marriage. My grandmother taught me the value of maintaining control over what's mine. Diana stood signaling for Mr. Peterson to pack up his briefcase. Consider carefully what you're doing, Natalie. The Bennett have a certain way of handling family finances. Refusing to participate could have implications for your future with James. Are you threatening my marriage because I won't sign over my inheritance? I asked incredulously. Diana adjusted her jacket primly. I'm simply pointing out that harmony in marriage comes from alignment on important matters. Like finances, James was raised with certain expectations as they moved toward the door. Diana turned back with one final comment. Think about it overnight. Mr. Peterson will be available. Tomorrow, if you reconsider, it would be a shame to create unnecessary tension over something as impersonal as property management. The moment they left, I called my attorney and explained everything that had happened. He immediately advised me to document the incident and assured me that my assets were secure from this type of manipulation. Next, I called the property management company for all 3 apartments and added additional security measures. No changes could be made without multi-factor authentication and in-person verification. As I paced the apartment that evening, I felt a strange mix of anger, vindication, and sadness. My instinct to keep my inheritance private had been justified, but at what cost to my new marriage? James arrived home the next afternoon instead of completing his full week in Chicago. He walked through the door looking exhausted, his normally perfect hair disheveled and dark circles under his eyes. You should have told me, were his first words as he sat down his hastily packed suitcase. You're right, I admitted I should have, but that doesn't justify what your mother tried to do. He sank onto the couch, loosening his tie. Mom said she was trying to help. She said incorporating your properties into the family trust would protect them from taxes and potential creditors. Did she mention the part where she and your father would have control over my assets? Or how she investigated my grandmother's estate behind her backs? James ran a hand through his hair. She's always been protective of family finances when Tracy married Michael. Mom did the same thing, insisted they consolidate their assets into the family trust, and did they? He looked away. Eventually, Michael resisted at first, but then Dad offered him a position in the company that came with certain financial requirements. The implications were becoming clearer. So your family uses financial leverage to control your sister and her husband. It's not control, James protested weakly. It's security the Bennett family has always operated this way. Our argument continued for hours, cycling through the same points. James felt betrayed, that I'd kept my inheritance secret. I felt violated by Diana's investigation and attempted manipulation. Neither of us was willing to fully concede our position. The next morning, Diana called James, not me, to check in. I could hear only his side of the conversation, but it was clear she was continuing her campaign. Mom, we're still figuring things out. No, I don't think bringing Dad into this will help right now. Yes, I understand the importance of family security. After he hung up, James looked defeated. She's not going to let this go. Over the next week, Diana deployed. What I came to think of as her flying monkeys first came. James's sister Tracy, arriving unannounced with pastries and concern. I just wanted to see how you two are doing, she said. her eyes darting around our apartment as if assessing its value. Mom mentioned there was some confusion about the family financial arrangements. Tracy's mediation consisted mainly of sharing how she and Michael had eventually seen the wisdom of joining the family trust. It just makes things easier, she insisted. Fighting Mom on financial matters never ends well. Next came Richard James's father calling to invite James to a men's lunch that turned into a 3-hour discussion about James's future in the company. When James returned, his expression was grim. "They're restructuring the creative department," he said flatly. "My position is being redefined with a significant pay cut unless I take on additional client responsibilities that would require much more travel. They're punishing you because of me." I realized aloud James didn't deny it. Dad says it's just business, but the timing is pretty clear. The pressure was affecting our marriage. We began sleeping in separate rooms. Conversations became tense, limited to necessities. James started coming home later, claiming work demands but smelling faintly of whiskey. One night, after a particularly silent dinner, James finally opened up. "This isn't the first time Mom has done something like this," he said quietly. "My Aunt Cynthia, Dad's sister, married against Mom's wishes. She had inherited some valuable art from their grandmother. Mom tried the same approach, insisting the art should be protected in the family trust. What happened?" James stared into his wineglass. "Aunt Cynthia refused suddenly. Uncle Robert's contracting business lost all its connections to Dad's corporate clients. They struggled financially, eventually moved to Oregon. We rarely see them now. That's terrible," I said, genuinely shocked. "Your mother deliberately damaged their livelihood," Mom would say. "She simply prioritized family, loyal contractors," James replied with a bitter laugh. "But yes, essentially, and you're okay with that kind of manipulation?" James finally met my eyes. "No, I'm not. I never have been, but it's been easier to go along than fight it until now." That conversation marked a turning point. The next day, I suggested we try couples therapy. To my surprise, James agreed immediately. In our first session, the therapist helped us see how Diana's financial control was part of a larger pattern affecting multiple generations of the family. James revealed patterns he'd observed throughout his childhood, how his mother wielded family money as both carrot and stick, rewarding compliance and punishing independence. "I don't want to live that way," he admitted. During our third session, "I grew up watching Dad give in to Mom's demands to keep the peace. I swore I'd never do that in my own marriage." "What do you want, James?" the therapist asked. He looked at me. Really? Looked at me for the first time in weeks. "I want a partnership, not a financial arrangement, not a business merger. A true partnership based on trust and respect. Even if that means standing up to your mother, potentially losing your position in the family business." James took a deep breath. Even then, that night, as we lay in bed together, for the first time in weeks, "I made a decision. I want to show you something," I said, reaching for my laptop. I pulled up the files for all 3 properties, the trust documents, the rental income statements, everything. "This is what my grandmother left me," I explained. "These are the assets your mother tried to gain control over." James studied the documents in silence, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he finally asked, his voice soft rather than accusatory. At first it was caution. "Past relationships taught me to be careful then. After meeting your family, it became fear. I saw how money was used as control in your family, and I wanted to keep this separate, safe. And now," I closed the laptop and took his hand. "Now, I want us to figure out together how we move forward as partners." The next day, James did something that shocked me. He called his mother and asked her to come over alone. "It's time we set some boundaries," he told me as we waited for her arrival. Diana arrived exactly on time, as always, dressed impeccably in a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile faltered slightly when James opened the door instead of me. "James, darling," she greeted him with their kisses. "I'm so glad you called. I've been worried about you." "Come in, Mom," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Natalie and I need to talk to you." We had arranged the living room deliberately, 2 chairs facing the sofa, creating a clear visual message that James and I were united. Diana noticed immediately, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took her seat on the sofa. "I hope this means you've both come to your senses about the family trust," She began setting her purse beside her. "Actually, we've made several decisions," James replied. "First, Natalie's inheritance will remain in her separate trust as her grandmother intended." Diana's pleasant expression hardened. "James, you don't understand the complications." "Second," he continued, cutting her off gently but firmly, "we need to establish clear boundaries about family financial matters. Our marriage is a partnership, not a business merger." I watched Diana's composure slip further. She turned to me, her voice taking on a sharp edge. "You've turned my son against his family after everything we've done." "Mom," James interrupted again, "this isn't about Natalie versus the family. This is about respect. You investigated my wife's finances behind our backs. You brought a notary to our home while I was away to pressure her into signing over her inheritance. That's not acceptable behavior." Diana's mask finally cracked completely. "Those properties should be under family control. Do you have any idea what we could do with those assets? The waterfront property alone could be leveraged for the business expansion your father has been planning for years." And there it was. The true motivation behind her scheme. "You researched the properties," I said. Understanding dawning, you know exactly what they're worth and what they could be used for. Diana didn't deny it. The Bennett family has worked for generations to build financial security. When opportunities arise to strengthen that foundation, we take them. That's how successful families operate. James leaned forward. "Is that why Dad's business needs to expand? Is there something you're not telling me about the company finances?" Diana's hesitation told us everything your father has made. Some investment decisions that haven't performed as expected. Nothing serious. Just temporary cash flow issues, gambling debts, James stated flatly. "Dad's gambling again, isn't he?" "The way." Diana's eyes widened, confirmed James's suspicion. "They're not gambling debts," she insisted. "Richard simply made some high-risk investments that—" "Stop lying, Mom," James said tiredly. "I've known about Dad's problems since college. I found the markers in his desk when I was looking for a stapler. How bad is it this time?" Diana's carefully constructed facade crumbled entirely. "Nearly 700,000, she admitted quietly. "The company is leveraged to its limit. The banks won't extend any more credit. We need collateral for a bridge loan until some client payments come through next quarter." I exchanged a look with James. Suddenly, Diana's desperate attempt to gain control of my properties made perfect sense. They needed my assets to save the family business from Richard's gambling problems. "Why didn't you just ask for help?" James said, his voice softer now instead of trying to manipulate and control the situation. "Bennetts don't ask for help," Diana replied stiffly. "We solve our own problems. Well, that approach clearly isn't working," I pointed out, and trying to seize my inheritance wasn't the answer. James reached for my hand, squeezing it gently before addressing his mother again. "Mom, Natalie and I are willing to help, but on our terms, not yours." The surprise on Diana's face was almost comical. "You would help after everything under certain conditions," I clarified. "First, Richard needs professional help for his gambling. Real help this time, not just promises to stop second." James continued, "I'm leaving the family business. I've been offered a position at Meridian Marketing, and I'm taking it." Diana gasped. "You can't leave the company. Now we need you. The company needs restructuring and professional management, not nepotism," James replied firmly. "And I need to build my own career separate from family dynamics." We outlined our proposal. I would offer one of my properties, the downtown apartment, as collateral for a loan to stabilize the company while Richard got treatment. In exchange, Diana would respect our financial independence, and Richard would bring in professional management for the company rather than relying solely on family. "And one more thing," James added, "you owe Natalie an apology, a real one." Diana sat in stunned silence for several moments. Then, to my amazement, she did something I never expected. She began to cry, not elegant, controlled tears, but genuine sobs that made her shoulders shake. "Everything is falling apart," she admitted. Between sobs, Richard keeps promising to stop, but he doesn't. "The company is hemorrhaging money." Tracy and Michael are talking about moving to Seattle. I was just trying to hold everything together. The only way I know how, in that moment, I saw Diana not as the manipulative mother-in-law, but as a frightened woman using control to mask her fear. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it helped me understand it. We're offering a path forward, I said, handing her a tissue. Not a takeover, but a collaboration. Isn't that better than trying to control everything yourself over the next weeks? Our proposal became a plan Richard initially resisted, but eventually agreed to treatment when faced with the alternative bankruptcy and public scandal Diana struggled with. Relinquishing control, but gradually accepted the new boundaries we established. James left the family business and thrived in his new position, coming home energized rather than drained. I continued managing my properties while working at the publishing house, eventually earning the promotion I'd been working toward. We used the downtown apartment as collateral for the loan, with clear legal agreements in place. Protecting my ownership, the rental income continued to flow into my separate account, though James and I were completely transparent with each other about our respective finances. 3 months after our confrontation, Diana invited us to dinner. I went with trepidation, but was surprised to find a different atmosphere in the Bennett home. Richard, fresh from his initial treatment program, seemed more present, less distracted. Diana had replaced her usual controlling hostility with an awkward but genuine attempt at warmth. "I've been doing some thinking," she said as we finished dessert, "about my mother and how she raised me to view money as security and control. It wasn't healthy then, and it's not healthy now." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to me. Inside was a formal letter of apology, along with the deed to a small beachfront property I'd never heard of. "This was my grandmother's cottage." Diana explained she left it to me with instructions to pass it on to the next generation. "When the time was right, I'd like you and James to have it. Not in the family trust, but as your own. It was a peace offering, a tangible acknowledgement of our independence." James and I accepted with genuine gratitude. That evening marked the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship with the Bennetts. Not perfect, not without occasional tension, but fundamentally changed for the better. As we drove home, James took my hand across the console. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he said quietly, "even when my family made it nearly impossible. Your grandmother taught you about financial independence," he continued, "and now you've taught my family about emotional independence. That's a different kind of inheritance, but just as valuable." 1 year after the confrontation with Diana, James and I celebrated our second wedding anniversary by spending a weekend at the beach cottage his mother had given us, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. We reflected on everything that had changed. "I never imagined we'd be here," I admitted, curled up beside him on the weathered porch swing. "Not just at this cottage, but at this place in our relationship with your family." James nodded his arm around my shoulders. "Sometimes I still can't believe how different things are. Dad's 6 months sober. Mom's actually seeing a therapist, and the company's doing better under professional management than it ever did as a family operation. The changes had indeed been remarkable. Richard had committed to his recovery program, attending meetings regularly and working with a financial therapist to address the underlying issues behind his gambling. Diana had reluctantly started therapy at Richard's insistence and was slowly unpacking generations of unhealthy financial attitudes. Meanwhile, James had flourished at Meridian Marketing, his creativity and work ethic recognized with a promotion to creative director. After just 8 months, I had received my long-awaited promotion at the publishing house and was now managing a team of junior editors. My property portfolio had expanded as well. With James' enthusiastic support, I had used some of the rental income to purchase a small 4th property, a fixer-upper that we were renovating together as a weekend project. The rental income from all properties now generated a significant monthly revenue stream that we partially reinvested and partially saved. "Your grandmother would be proud." "Not," James said, kissing the top of my head. "You've not only preserved her legacy but built on it. I think she'd be most proud that I maintained my independence while building a true partnership." I replied, "That's what she really wanted for me. Not just financial security, but the confidence to stand on my own terms." Looking back, I could clearly see the lessons that had emerged from our difficult first year of marriage. Financial independence in marriage isn't about secrecy or separate lives. It's about mutual respect for each person's autonomy and choices. James and I now maintained healthy transparency about our finances while respecting each other's decision-making authority, legal protection matters, even with loved ones. My grandmother's foresight in establishing the trust had provided the foundation for me to withstand Diana's manipulation attempts. We had since updated all our legal documents to reflect our partnership, while protecting our individual assets. Family dynamics run deep and often span generations. Diana's controlling behavior hadn't emerged from nowhere. It was the product of her own upbringing and the financial values instilled by her parents. Breaking those patterns required conscious effort and professional help. True partnership requires vulnerability and trust. My initial secrecy, though understandable given the circumstances, had created unnecessary tension. Now James and I practice radical honesty about both finances and feelings. Setting healthy boundaries is essential for family relationships to thrive. The clear limits we established with Diana and Richard had actually improved our relationship with them, creating respect where previously there had been only resentment and manipulation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, James squeezed my hand. "I have news," he said, his voice carrying a hint of excitement. "Meridian is launching a new division focused on nonprofit marketing, and they want me to head it up. That's amazing," I exclaimed, turning to face him. "That's exactly the kind of work you've been wanting to do." "Nah," he nodded, his eyes bright. "There's more. We got the Morgan Foundation account. They want a complete rebranding for their educational initiatives. It's a huge project, easily 6 figures. I hugged him tightly, genuinely thrilled for his success. "I'm so proud of you. You've really found your place there." "I have news too," I said. After a moment, my heart racing slightly, "I took a test this morning. We're going to have a baby." The joy that spread across James's face was everything I could have hoped for. As we celebrated our expanding family, we also discussed how we wanted to approach finances and independence with our child. "I want to create a trust for them, like my grandmother did for me." I explained, something that gives them security, but also teaches them independence. James agreed enthusiastically, and will teach them the value of both financial literacy and emotional boundaries, lessons your grandmother taught you, and that we've had to learn the hard way with my family over the following months. As my pregnancy progressed, we put these plans into action. We established a trust for our child's future education and needs, while also creating a detailed will that specified how our respective assets would be managed. Diana's reaction to the pregnancy news had been another testament to her ongoing growth. Rather than attempting to control the situation with unsolicited advice and financial help, she had simply asked what we needed and how she could support us. "I want to be a different kind of grandmother than I was a mother," she admitted during a surprisingly candid lunch. "I don't want my grandchild to grow up afraid of making financial mistakes or feeling that love is conditional on compliance." As my due date approached, James and I also finalized plans for a charitable foundation in my grandmother Eleanor's name. The foundation would provide financial literacy education for young women, helping them develop the independence and confidence that had been so important in my own life. "It's the perfect way to honor her legacy," James said as we signed the foundation documents, "not just preserving what she built, but extending it to help others." Looking back on the journey from those tense early days of marriage to where we stood now, I felt immense gratitude for my grandmother's foresight. Her inheritance had provided not just financial security, but also the means to discover the true strength of my marriage and the courage to establish healthy boundaries. The day my mother-in-law showed up with a notary had been a crisis point, but ultimately it had forced necessary growth and change for everyone involved. The apartments themselves were valuable, but the lessons they had taught us were the true inheritance as we prepare to welcome our child into the world. I'm thankful every day that I kept quiet about those 3 apartments, not because secrecy itself has value, but because that initial caution gave us the time and space to build a relationship strong enough to withstand the truth and to transform a potential disaster into the foundation for a genuinely healthy family legacy. Have you ever had to protect something that was rightfully yours from someone who felt entitled to it? How did you handle the situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more about navigating tricky family dynamics and building financial independence. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't the money or property itself, but the wisdom to protect and use it wisely.